She trusted him. He controlled her. And when she disappeared, nobody suspected the man behind the mask. But when her skeleton surfaced in a quiet Irish forest, a terrifying double life was exposed, and the most twisted murder case in Ireland's history began to unravel. Elaine O'Hara was 36 years old. She lived in Killakee, a peaceful suburb south of Dublin, Ireland. By day, she worked as a childcare assistant. By night, she carried a different weight, one that very few people knew. For years, Elaine battled severe depression and borderline personality disorder. She had spent time in psychiatric hospitals, including St. Edmundsbury Hospital, trying to stabilize her mental health. But behind her struggles, she was still fighting to build a normal life. She had dreams. She was taking classes to become a Montessori teacher. Her father described her as kind, gentle, and deeply vulnerable. But loneliness haunted Elaine, and in that loneliness, she started seeking companionship in online BDSM forums, looking for someone who could give her both the emotional connection and the control dynamic she craved. That search would lead her directly to the man who would eventually destroy her life. It was the morning of August 22, 2012, a day that started like so many others, but would end in tragedy. That morning, Elaine O'Hara was discharged from St. Edmundsbury Psychiatric Hospital. She had been receiving treatment, once again fighting to keep her mental health stable. But according to her father, she seemed positive, even hopeful about her future. Shortly after leaving the hospital, Elaine drove her black Fiat Punto to Shanganagh Cemetery, where her mother was buried. A witness later reported seeing her at the cemetery, crying quietly near the grave. That was the last confirmed sighting of Elaine alive. Her car remained parked at the cemetery. Inside, Gardaí later found her purse, medication, and personal belongings, but no note or clue explaining her disappearance. When Elaine failed to return home, her family reported her missing. As hours turned into days, fears quickly escalated. But with her history of depression and previous suicide attempts, the initial investigation leaned toward the theory that she may have taken her own life. At that point, nobody imagined that Elaine's disappearance was the beginning of one of Ireland's darkest murder investigations. In the days following her disappearance, Gardaí launched a missing person inquiry. They interviewed family, friends, and neighbors, hoping for any lead. But there was nothing, no credit card activity, no phone calls, no sightings. Elaine's family was deeply concerned. Her father, Frank O'Hara, insisted that while his daughter struggled with mental health, she was trying to build a better life. She had future plans. She was taking courses. She wanted to work with children. And most importantly, she had not left any kind of farewell message. Gardaí found her car undisturbed at Shanganagh Cemetery, her mobile phone silent, and no evidence of foul play at the scene. The strong possibility of suicide continued to hover over the investigation, but police kept the case open. For months, no progress was made. Elaine simply seemed to have vanished, no trace, no witnesses, no answers. The investigation stalled, but in the background, the darkness that took her was still waiting to be exposed. More than 1 year passed. Elaine O'Hara's case was cold. Then, in September 2013, nature delivered the first shocking clue. During an unusually dry summer, water levels at Vartry Reservoir in County Wicklow dropped dramatically. A man walking along the exposed shore noticed a plastic bag partially buried in the mud. Inside, Gardaí recovered disturbing items: handcuffs, a ball gag, bondage restraints, a leather mask, and her prescription glasses. Also inside was a loyalty card registered to Elaine O'Hara. This was no longer a simple missing person case. Something sinister had happened. But the discovery didn't stop there. Just a few days later, a woman walking her dog in the nearby Killakee mountain area made another horrifying find. Her dog had returned from the woods carrying human bones. Gardai launched a full search of the wooded area. Scattered across the forest floor, they found more skeletal remains, clothing, and personal items. Forensic tests confirmed what everyone feared: the bones belonged to Elaine O'Hara. Suddenly, this wasn't a suicide. This was something far darker. And investigators were about to uncover just how terrifying Elaine's secret world really was. With Elaine's remains recovered, Gardai knew they were dealing with a homicide. But to understand what really happened, they turned to her private life, and what they uncovered would shock even seasoned investigators. Elaine had been active on several BDSM fetish websites and online forums. Through these platforms, she had entered into a disturbing relationship with a man who called himself Master. This man wasn't just playing a fantasy role. He had full psychological control over Elaine. Their communication was filled with violent messages describing brutal stabbing fantasies and ultimate control. Elaine, emotionally vulnerable and desperate for connection, submitted to his desires. Investigators traced online accounts and phone data that led them to Graham Dwyer, a 41-year-old married architect living in Foxrock, Dublin. On the surface, Dwyer lived a picture-perfect life: a prestigious job, a wife, children, and a beautiful home. But behind closed doors, he was feeding violent, sadistic urges. The texts between Dwyer and Elaine were chilling. He wrote, "You were born to be stabbed. My ultimate fantasy is stabbing you while having sex. You will go down to the shore and wait." And that last message was sent on the very day Elaine disappeared. What started as an online fantasy had crossed a terrifying line. But Dwyer's twisted secret world was about to be fully exposed. As Gardai dug deeper, they discovered that both Elaine and Graham Dwyer had been using secret prepaid phones, known as burner phones, to communicate outside of their regular lives. Elaine's phone was labeled Slave in Dwyer's device. His was saved as Master in hers. By analyzing mobile phone records, investigators reconstructed a chilling digital footprint. Both phones had been active on the day Elaine disappeared, August 22, 2012. Cell tower data placed both devices near Vartry Reservoir, the same location where Elaine's bag was found over 1 year later. Shortly after that date, both phones went silent, never to be activated again. But the phone data held even more damning information. Forensic examination revealed thousands of texts filled with violent fantasies, manipulation, and commands from Dwyer. The messages painted a terrifying picture of a man who was not just fantasizing, he was orchestrating. In addition, Dwyer's home computer contained disturbing videos showing violent BDSM acts, further proving his obsession with inflicting pain. This combination of physical evidence, digital trails, and his own words built a mountain of proof that would soon be laid out in court. In January 2015, Graham Dwyer stood trial at Dublin's Central Criminal Court. The world watched as one of Ireland's most disturbing murder cases unfolded in public for the first time. The prosecution laid out their case in brutal detail. They argued that Dwyer had manipulated Elaine O'Hara for months, taking advantage of her mental illness, her loneliness, and her vulnerability. He fed her violent fantasies that, for him, were never just role play. The prosecution presented thousands of text messages where Dwyer discussed stabbing, control, and death. Videos showing him performing violent BDSM acts with other women. The physical evidence, the bag at Vartry Reservoir, the remains on Killakee Mountain, and the secret phones. The final chilling message: go down to the shore and wait. The defense, on the other hand, argued that Elaine may have taken her own life. They pointed out that no cause of death could be determined because the body was too decomposed. They claimed Dwyer was simply acting out consensual fantasies. But the sheer weight of the evidence, especially Dwyer's own words and the timeline of the phone data, left little room for doubt. The jury listened to weeks of harrowing testimony, and when the trial reached its end, the verdict was swift. On March 27, 2015, after more than 7 weeks of trial and over 200 witnesses, the jury returned its decision. It took them less than 7 hours to reach a unanimous verdict. Graham Dwyer was found guilty of the murder of Elaine O'Hara. During sentencing, the judge described Dwyer's actions as profoundly disturbing and depraved. He emphasized that Dwyer had deliberately preyed on a mentally vulnerable woman to fulfill his own sadistic fantasies. This was not accidental. This was premeditated and calculated. Dwyer was sentenced to life in prison. As the verdict was read, Elaine's family finally received the justice they had fought for over 2.5 years. But even with the conviction, the full horror of what Elaine endured would haunt everyone who followed the case. The mask had fallen. The respectable architect, husband, and father was unmasked as a sadistic predator. But the story was not yet finished. What followed was a legal battle that would challenge not just Dwyer's conviction, but the entire system that brought him to justice. Even after his conviction, Graham Dwyer's legal fight wasn't over. His defense team launched a series of appeals, but their focus was not on his guilt. It was on the evidence that brought him down, the mobile phone data. Ireland's data retention laws, which allowed authorities to store and access phone metadata, had played a key role in piecing together Dwyer's movements and communications with Elaine. But in 2014, the European Court of Justice ruled that mass retention of telecom data by EU member states violated privacy rights. Dwyer's legal team argued that much of the phone evidence should never have been admissible in the first place. The case eventually reached the Court of Justice of the European Union, and in April 2022, the court agreed that Ireland's data retention laws had breached EU rules. This decision shook legal systems across Europe. Many feared that Dwyer's conviction might be overturned. However, in July 2024, Ireland's Supreme Court delivered a final ruling. Despite the breach in data retention laws, the phone evidence against Dwyer would remain admissible. The court stated that excluding this evidence would be contrary to the public interest given the weight of his crimes. As of 2025, Graham Dwyer remains in prison, serving a life sentence for the murder of Elaine O'Hara. The case not only exposed one man's secret world, but forced an entire continent to confront the balance between justice and privacy.